Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of Vol Basketball Fever. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by a special guest for this episode. Gene Henley is going to be out for the next couple weeks probably because he and his son are doing AAU circuit basketball, and he's also got other stuff going on. So probably going to have a couple guests on here for the next couple of weeks. Happy to be joined by Jack Foster, a new face to the show here. He works for and does the main beat for basketball, for Tennessee basketball, for Volunteer Country on Sports Illustrated. He also works as an intern for Omaha Productions, who you guys may have heard of because that's through Peyton Manning, Omaha Productions. He also does stuff at the University of Tennessee for Volunteer News, for WTK Rock Solid Sports. Jack, you're a jack of all trades. Glad to have you on here, buddy.
I try to be. Thank you for the kind introduction, but I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Happy to have you on here and happy to talk some both Vols and Lady Vols because Jack does both coverage for Vols and Lady Vols basketball. So this will be kind of split into two parts of the episode. The first half will be more dedicated to the men's team, second half to the women's team. So if you're interested in one or both, you can kind of skip around if you want to. There'll be timestamps if you're listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube. You'll see little chapters, segmented out there. But I want to say thank you all for tuning in, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube while you're here, or subscribe to the podcast. And if you're on YouTube, give this video a like. And you can also follow Jack on Twitter if you want to. He's at Jack Foster TV on Twitter. And I'll plug our Twitter. We're at Vol Hoops Fever. I'm at Mr._Rutherford if you want to follow me too. And we're also on Facebook at Vol Basketball Fever. Well, Jack, we want to get into it here. Talk about the men's team to start off things here. One of the questions I get, or at least still see asked probably once or twice a week, even though now we're in the throes of football offseason and football's almost here, when people are talking about basketball, one of the big questions I still see is, doesn't Rick Barnes still have a scholarship available? Don't they still have a spot open for this upcoming roster? They do. And at this point, there isn't really any intel. There isn't really like any inside info, at least that I've seen anywhere that people have shared or anybody's told me about like what the staff's going to do with that, if they're even targeting anyone. And Jack, I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, hey, do you have any information? I'm curious your opinion on it, because I've shared it on the show here with Gene before of my thoughts on it. I think they're better served to try to fill that spot right now for this upcoming season, because with the way the transfer portal is, you're going to have spots anyway available next year. You don't really need to kind of save spots like you used to. But at the same time, we're in early July at this point. Unless there's an international prospect, unless there's someone else that, is in the transfer market that we just haven't heard about being contacted, or maybe there's another latecomer in the 22 class like last year with Sakai Ziegler. At this point, I think the options are probably pretty slim, so they may just by default hold on to it. So I'm curious your thoughts if you think that, given the point where we are now, should they just hold on to it and wait for it to use next offseason, or should they maybe try to go ahead and add somebody else?
No, it's definitely, an intriguing topic here because, like you mentioned, Sakai Ziegler, what happened last year in that situation, surprising everybody with how productive he was for the Vols last season definitely was a pleasant surprise. So, you want to hold out hope that maybe something like that can come along down the pike as we enter August. But like you said, it doesn't look like there's any really candidates to fill that final spot. So you have to think that, like you said, maybe by default, they'll hold it going into next season. But I think they should try to fill it because you look at next season, all the open spots you're going to have, like you said, people are going to enter the transfer portal. We saw multiple people enter the transfer portal from Tennessee, depart Tennessee this offseason, and Santiago Vescovi and Josiah Jordan James, it's probably going to be their last season in the Tennessee uniform. You have to think Julian Phillips could be a one and done. So you're going to have multiple spots open. I think if they could try to find a guy, just a project and anywhere in the roster really could be, a post player, could be a guard. I think a guard would behoove them better, especially with a Walker reclassifying. So maybe if you could find a guard, maybe he can make a solid addition for Tennessee as early as this season, like Sakai Ziegler did last year, because you're going to have plenty of spots available next season.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, we saw the staff go after veteran point guards in the transfer portal, whether it was the kid Yuri Collins from St. Louis, whether it was I'm blanking on some of the names. The kid from Iowa State that they went after, like you saw them going after guys who had a year or more experience in college at the point guard position, because I think ideally you don't want to have to rely on just Sakai Ziegler and BJ Edwards as your point guard options, because I think the staff loves and trusts Ziegler, and I don't think it's a reflection of them not trusting him. I think it's a matter of he's a 5'9" sophomore who, while very good, and again, obviously, outperformed what expectations were for him last year at the beginning of the season. You don't want him to, I don't think you want him to be out there 32 minutes a game like you had Kenny Chandler being the lead point guard and having to rely on another true freshman who maybe isn't to the same standard, isn't to the same talent level as Kenny Chandler. That's not a knock on BJ Edwards. It's just more of a praise of Kenny Chandler. He is an incredible talent, as we are already seeing very early on in the NBA Summer League, as he showed out in the first game when he had, I think, 3 or 4 blocks in that game, 8 points, I think 4 rebounds in that game too. But I think you're right. Like, yeah, no, I think you're right about if they get someone, I would think it would make more sense to go get a guard, because even if they can't be super immediate contributors this year, even if it's not someone in the transfer portal who's been a multi-year college player, even if it's a late addition in the recruiting front in the 22 class as a guard, like you said, look who they're losing in the roster, from this year to next that we know of. It's going to most likely be Vescovy and James. Like, for certain, you're losing those two guys. I would be stunned if those two guys, come back next year, and Tyreek Key, because he's a 1-year transfer. Those are all guard. I mean, technically James is kind of a forward. He can play the 4, but he's a guard wing type player. He's a wing. Tennessee needs to, in my opinion, the next addition they make, whatever it is, should be a wing. Again, I'll go look at the transfer portal while you're talking, Jack. I don't know that there's a ton of guys left out there that are, maybe you'd be taking a flyer on somebody, but if you take a flyer on somebody and then they just leave and transfer again next year or whatever, it's not a loss. The only I guess downside could be if you take a guy who has already used his one-time transfer, or I guess is using his one-time transfer on you, and then you take him, and then maybe you are technically losing a roster spot for next year because the guy's going to stay because he can't just transfer again. But at the same time, thought the same thing of Justin Powell, because he used his one-time transfer to come to Tennessee, and then he still ended up transferring. So I think you're right, though, that whatever this, if it gets used between now and the end of August or beginning of September, whatever, I think it should be on a wing player. But again, like, I don't know who else is out there, unless there's, again, maybe there's some stone we haven't unturned as in the media or as a fan myself, or maybe there's some international player, but it doesn't seem like, it seems like there's slim pickings at this point.
No, yeah, I like a wing addition as well, because, like you said, you have a really young prospect in BJ Edwards as a point guard type player. You go to DJ Jefferson at the wing position, and I actually was really impressed with DJ Jefferson's tape. I'm high on him. I don't think he can, start or anything like that this season, of course. He's going to get acclimated to the Tennessee waters, but to add another, sophomore transfer maybe, or junior, just someone who can at least play a couple of years for Tennessee, in moving forward at the wing position would help when Josiah leaves. So yeah, I like that position. And I think you can go to the point guard position as well, because you don't want to put a whole lot of weight on BJ Edwards' shoulders. And I think they're probably going to kind of have to in year one. And BJ Edwards just isn't the type of player Kennedy Chandler is. As you said, that's more of a praise towards KC. BJ Edwards is very solid coming out of Knox Catholic, but Tyreek Key, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they use him. But if they use him as more of that shooting guard role, it's going to be a lot on BJ Edwards, relieving Zakai Ziegler, assuming Ziegler would get the starting role at the 1 if they play Key as a true shooting guard. So yeah, there's definitely a spot to be had on this roster. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think that they'll be just fine if they roll with what they have right now. But, going back to the original question here, an addition right now, I think it would be better than holding on to that spot.
Well, Jack, while you were talking, I like I said, I was going to look up kind of names of who are in the transfer portal. Kind of the last kind of, I guess, quote unquote, big name guy who's kind of a guard, or is a guard player in the portal right now, is a guy named Casey Simmons, who played for Northwestern, or I guess played for Northwestern. Went to Northwestern. I think he's maybe a sophomore freshman. I think he was there for 1 year or whatever, but he's a former 4-star prospect at a high school. He entered the transfer portal on June 18th, so he's one of the more recent entries into the portal. In fact, I think he's one of the most recent in terms of like last 2 or 3 guys that are kind of notable, at least on the 247 transfer portal here, that are that entered it. So again, doesn't mean Tennessee's, in with them or anything like that, but I guess that's a name that's just out there. There's also a guy named, also Casey Simmons is a shooting guard too, so I don't, not a point guard, but he is a wing. He's a 6'5" wing player. There also, you had a guy who is another shooting guard. A couple of the guys that haven't picked up spots yet, because there's plenty of guys who've transferred and who have committed elsewhere, but you had another guy who I saw who was a guard who transferred. He had Tyler Lundblade from SMU is still in the transfer portal, who transferred in May. So again, this is just a cursory look. There could be, I don't know, a story behind these guys. I don't know if maybe they're ineligible or whatever, or, why they haven't found a home yet, but those are just a couple of names I saw. So we'll see. I'm not holding out hope that we get a huge, update on Tennessee picking up a transfer or anything like that between now and, August sometime, but we'll see. But, we do know, however, Jack, that Tennessee has made quite a few additions this offseason as it is. Again, they have one spot left, but even if they don't fill that spot, they have done to me, in my opinion, a pretty solid job of replacing the guys who departed last year and filling those holes that I think the roster had after those departures. And most of them were expected. I think Justin Powell was kind of a surprise, but not really, a big blow. And Brendan Huntley Hatfield, I think, was kind of a surprise as well. But again, based on potential was a big blow, but based on actual production from last year, not really. You can argue it, but I want to get your thoughts on kind of how Tennessee's roster construction has gone this offseason and just kind of running down the additions here, looking at the roster online for Tennessee. So I'm going to go by jersey number on there. You had, of course, 5-star freshman Julian Phillips, Indiana State grad transfer Tyreek Key that was coming in, or the only transfer so far that Tennessee has nabbed that has come in as well. DJ Jefferson as a 4-star prospect, a guard there, and also BJ Edwards, who is a 4-star guard coming in as well. And the most recent addition to Tennessee's roster, Tobe Awaka, who we talked about before. He committed to Tennessee and said he was technically a 22 recruit, then said he's committing in the 23 class. I think there's some stuff up in the air about his AAU team and during the summer and kind of finishing up with them or not. But it was announced, I think literally the day after G and I recorded our episode last week, that he is actually signing in the 22 class and will be joining Tennessee for the second, I guess, summer semester of classes as well. So, yeah, so I want to get your thoughts on that, Jack, because I look at the big departures for Tennessee last year were Kennedy Chandler and John Fulkerson, but you return. This was a question somebody asked last week about, how does Tennessee's returning production fare against other SEC schools? Tennessee returns a lot. They returned 4 of their top 5 scorers from last year, obviously losing Kennedy Chandler as their number 1 guy, but everyone else they return. You have some interesting depth pieces, and I think you added a lot of good talent at a lot of spots. So I'm curious, would that really kind of, I guess, diving too much into expectations for this team? What are your thoughts on what Tennessee did with the roster construction, who they've brought in, and how they addressed those needs that the roster had?
No, yeah, I think they've done a great job this offseason. And, losing Brendan Huntley Hatfield, as you said, kind of a surprise, but, they shored up that end with nabbing 5-star Julian Phillips, who has, even more upside than you could argue BHH had entering his year 1. So, he could be a one and done. I talked about that earlier. Julian Phillips is a stud. I think he's going to end up starting majority of the games this season. I expect a lot of things from him. And he's just a great addition in post. You got Olivier Kamwa returning from injury too. I think that's one of the biggest stories of this upcoming Tennessee season is, people kind of forget Olivier Kamwa got lost in the wash because he, got injured and was lost for the season last year. And then Jonas Adu had to step up, but you got Adu coming back. He's better. And you got Kamwa coming back along with adding Phillips and Uros Plavsic coming off a career year. I don't think they're going to miss John Fulkerson too much. Of course, all the fan favorites, he is a fan favorite. So all the fans are going to miss him. But as far as Tennessee on the court, I don't think there's anything to worry about there. And then we talked about the guard situation. So looking at the post, I think they've done a great job bringing in Julian Phillips. Tobe Awaka reclassifying is only going to help depth. We could see a redshirt situation for him this year. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't think you can have a lot of expectations for Awaka this year being so young and all. But with Phillips, Adu being better, I think he's probably going to be an X factor for Tennessee this season, in my opinion. Whether that's as a key player off the bench or even as a starter. I think Uros opens the season as the starter at the 5, Kama playing the 4. Sit the young guys to start and have the experienced guys play. But yeah, they're going to have a lot of depth, and I think that's something they kind of struggled with last season, especially after Kama went down. So going down the stretch like that, if all those guys can stay healthy, they're gonna be mean on the front court, that's for sure. So I like the way they've attacked that. I'm high on DJ Jefferson, BJ Edwards, he's going to grow. And Tyreek Key, this is it for him. It's his last year. He's got to improve his draft stock as much as he possibly can this year. So he's going to be fighting. And then Santi and Joe just build off what they did last year because they were excellent.
Yeah, you kind of addressed, I guess, kind of the two of the topics I was wanted to build off to after this, and one of them was kind of the post play. How do you view the post? Because I think you made that interesting point there that you think Uro starts at the 5 and Camwa at the 4. I would tend to agree with that at the beginning of the season, especially. I think you'll see a starting 5 of probably Sakai, Vescovi, James, Camwa, and Urosh. But I think by the time, as the season goes on, just like we saw last year, I think you'll see multiple, and some of the last year is because of injury, but even without injuries, you saw multiple starting 5s last year. The only consistent ones really were Kennedy, Chandler, Vescovi, James. Like those are your 3 main guys, and Camwa before he got hurt. But those 3 were really the 3 that played the bulk of the minutes and started every game they played except for James when he was hurt. But I think that front court is going to be interesting because I agree with you. I think Camwa is kind of a name that people aren't talking about enough, in my opinion. He was starting to really kind of roll and find a groove in SEC play before he got hurt, and was really kind of being a productive big man for Tennessee before his injury. I think he will bounce back okay from that injury. It's kind of always hard to tell, especially with big men with ankle injuries and leg injuries. But I think he'll be fine. He and Key both were recently cleared fully for all basketball activities, so that's good news for Tennessee. But with Julian Phillips there, with Jonas Adu, getting a playing experience under his belt last year and flashing a lot of defensive potential. Even with, you mentioned, I don't expect a ton from Tobe Awaka, but he's a guy that maybe does, come in and surprise just like Ziegler did, because they both played, again, same AAU team, both from, same AAU team, both from New York, so you can't ever discount their work ethic, I don't think. And then heck, even throw in a guy like Josiah who plays an undersized 4 and played that a lot last year. And you had your small ball lineup where you had Urosh or someone out there at the 5 or Fulkerson at the 5, and then James at the 4, and then you had Vescovi and Ziegler and Kennedy Chandler. I don't know that we'll see that this year because you don't have, to me, probably 2 point guards you trust out there at the same time like you did last year. But I still think James plays the 4, a decent amount this year, and maybe he plays the 4 and Phillips plays the 3, because I think Phillips' skill set maybe fits more as a 3. So I just curious your thoughts on the front court, because I think the back court, we more or less kind of know what you're going to have. You're going to have Ziegler be the main point guard, Vescovi be your main 2, Key be kind of a guy who plays a good amount of minutes off the bench, in my opinion, as also a 2, and then James can play that 3. He can play a 1. He can play 1 through 4 basically. I think we kind of know the backcourt, and then can maybe see what Jemai Shaq, if he takes another step. You mentioned DJ Jefferson as well. BJ Edwards would be the backup point guard. Kind of know the backcourt. That front court to me has a lot of, I don't want to say question marks. There are question marks. There's not as many question marks as last year, but there's a lot of interesting scenarios, I think, for the front court this year.
No, if you go back to last year, after Kemal got injured, it was kind of, BHH and Urosh were starting, and they wouldn't stay on the court too long, and then they'd be relieved by the combination of Jonas Adu and John Fulkerson. It always seems like Fulkerson and Adu are on the court at the same time, and then Huntley Hatfield and Urosh were on the court at the same time. So I think we'll see a similar approach to that. You got Phillips, Camwa, Adu, and Urosh. We'll see 2 of those guys on the court at the same time, and it'll just be a healthy rotation of that, and I think that's a very smart decision. I think at the end of the season, once SEC play ramps up, Julian Phillips will end up starting, and I wouldn't even be surprised if maybe they play Camwa at the 5 and just play some small ball lineups. I don't know if it'll be super consistent with that starting lineup, but I think Urosh will end up starting at the 5 majority of the season. But, you could see Phillips and Plavšić play together. And I don't know, Adu and Camwa. I think you could see Camwa and Adu and then Phillips and Urosh. That would be my best guess. Of course, we're all guessing here, just like we are with anything. And the Tennessee has so much talent. You can see anything. You mentioned Tyreek Key. I think he can bring the ball up the court just fine and play the 1. And, keep Ziegler on the bench a couple of games to be a spark plug if you need it. So there's a lot of avenues you can go down with this Tennessee basketball roster. But like I said, I think a combination of 2 of those guys, rotate them in and out, is how we're going to see the post work, with Tobe Awaka being that extra guy to use in any situation. So as far as the potential of the post, it really lies on the shoulders of Julian Phillips, because I think you know what you're getting with Jonas Adu as a rim protector. I think you know what you're getting with Urosh now. if Julian Phillips can be that shooting big and he can make a lot of splashes on both sides of the ball. And, let's not forget Camel's an excellent shooter as well. So those two guys on the offensive side of the ball with Urosh and Jonas's defense, you got to like what you see.
Yeah, Camel last year from three, he played 22 games last year and had shot 44.8% from three. Again, he hadn't shot a ton of threes in that. Yeah, he didn't actually shoot a ton of threes. But he attempted 20, almost basically 30 last year in the 29 games, and again made 45% of them. So I mean, I expect that number to be maybe a little bit higher this year, especially after you lose Chandler. But also, I mean, you still have Vescovy, you still have James, who obviously came on very strong from a 3-point line at the end of the year, and Ziegler was a not a bad 3-point shooter as well. And I imagine Julian Phillips is going to take plenty of threes as well. He seems to be a guy who likes to shoot the three. Tyreek Key's going to shoot the three. So I think Tennessee, as much as they shot the 3-pointer last year, I almost wonder, Jack, before we kind of look ahead to some 23 prospects, I almost wonder if this team this year maybe takes more threes, maybe? I don't know, because I think I like the post situation a little bit better than last year. But I also do think, too, that Phillips and Key will attack the basket more than we saw guys last year. I think that was something that Tennessee really lacked last year, that they had a lower free throw attempts per game than they had in a while because you didn't have a lot of guys who would attack and finish up the rim. Tyreek Key definitely does. He averaged, I think, 5 or 6 free throw attempts per game in his career at Indiana State. And from what I've learned, talking to his head coach for Julian Phillips and also just watching some of his game, he also likes to attack the basket and drive to the basket. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we won't see more 3-pointers. Maybe we'll see more guys actually driving to the rim. But it's worth mentioning because I think this team is possibly just as maybe potent from three as last year's was, with looking at some of the guys on the team that like to shoot threes, and as good as they've been in their careers too.
No, I think we could definitely see them shoot more, especially since you're returning Vescovy, of course. And like you said, James got better from deep as the season went on last year. But, like we said, the bigs with Camois healthy and Julian Phillips here, definitely going to see the 3-ball being shot a lot more, because the bigs that ended the season last year, Brandon Huntley-Hatfield never really tapped into his full potential, didn't seem confident on the court. We know Jonas Adu is not a shooter. Urosh is definitely not a shooter, and neither is John Fulkerson from deep. So I think the potential to make more 3-pointers is better suited for this roster. And I think we could definitely see it as much as they shot last year. Like you said, it'll probably be more this year.
Well, we'll have plenty of time to talk about, this upcoming season as the weeks and months go on, but it is the off season for basketball. So that means it is recruiting time. We're in the middle of, we're at the beginning now of July and beginning of kind of the open live period. Again, AAU ball. That's why Gene's not here, because his son is doing AAU ball right now. But Tennessee, their coaches, Rick Barnes and the assistants, have been out and about this week already. We saw pictures tweeted out of them watching JP Estrella, of them watching Freddie DeLone. There's several names, I guess, that we can throw out there, Jack. A guy like Aiden Holloway was brought up in the last episode we did. It was a mailbag one, and I said, I wouldn't get your hopes up if I were a Vol fan at this point. It seems like he's trending towards Auburn. It's kind of your last big point, like right now at least, true point guard prospect Tennessee's targeting in the 23 class as a point guard prospect, or as a prospect, excuse me. But you still have Tennessee, I think, in really good spots for some other names, like a Justin Edwards, who is a top 5 prospect. I don't think they'll end up getting too much lead, but you have an Andrej Stojakovic, who is the son of Pedro Stojakovic, who I think is still planning on taking a visit to Tennessee, possibly. But you have other names you can throw out there. Again, Tennessee already has a guy like Cade Phillips, who's a 4-star, committed to them in this class. Listed as a power forward. He's not a big power forward in terms of like build, but he's a 6'9", 200 forward who has a lot of skills. We talked about him when he committed to Tennessee. I already mentioned JP Estrella as a guy that Tennessee is targeting, but Duke is kind of into the picture now, so that's kind of a we'll see. And then Freddie DeLone, again, a combo guard who Tennessee is after, who plays over in Raleigh, North Carolina, who Tennessee loves going after those North Carolina prospects. Anyone else I kind of missed there, Jack, or anything that you maybe I think Aiden Holloway is committing this month. I don't know. Again, that'd get my hopes up too high for Tennessee, but I didn't think Julian Phillips was going to come to Tennessee when he reopened his recruitment, and seemed like he was going to go elsewhere and like Auburn, and then he came to Tennessee. So I could be wrong. So maybe maybe Aiden Holloway between now and his commitment does end up changes, the waters change. He goes to Tennessee, but I don't know about that. But the 23 class, I think, will be interesting because, again, we'll see, I think, a number of guys commit to Tennessee, but also there'll be a lot of transfer portal options. But if it's anything like the last couple of years, Tennessee, even after now the one-time transfer rule has been enacted, each offseason that's happened, they've only taken one transfer so far. Justin Powell last year for Tennessee didn't work out, obviously. Then Tyreek Key this year. They've not gone like a transfer heavy like an Arkansas has in years past, or an Alabama has in years past, or this year like a Florida has, for example. Tennessee's only really taken one per year. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they only take one, maybe two next year or this next cycle. But Tennessee, just like the last few years, they're in on a lot of big names and highly recruited or highly ranked prospects in this 23 cycle.
No, you're definitely correct. And, you know, the majority of the names you mentioned were the ones I had on my list. So I think you hit the nail on the head on the others. There's a couple. Cody Williams from Arizona. He's a wing, and, you know, Tennessee's interest is pretty high on him, but he's still kind of a cool interest with the Vols. Mikey Williams, Tennessee's interested in, but yeah, Stovakovic is a big one for me. And you know, you mentioned JP Estrella. I've always been impressed with JP Estrella. I actually had a friend who knew him, and he had been talking to me about JP Estrella for a while now. But like you said, looks like he's trending toward Duke, same as Aiden Holloway with Auburn. So I think Justin Edwards is the one to look to here when you're talking about 2023 prospects. He's a total stud. But would be a great addition to the wing, 6'7", 180, playing up in Philly right now. So seems he's interested in Tennessee. I know Rod Clark's been hitting that recruiting trail hard with Edwards. So, you know, we're still early in the process here. Like you said, it's about to ramp up probably for the 23 guys. But, you know, all the guys you said are really the ones I was looking at.
I think I know the answer to this question because we kind of already touched on basically like what we do at that last scholarship spot for this current cycle. But what do you, in your opinion, kind of what are the biggest needs Tennessee really needs to address, whether it's, again, recruiting or transfer portal in this 23 cycle? Because, again, we don't know, you know, there will be another transfer or two off the roster between, you know, now and the end of next, I guess, after the end of next season. But you look at who we do know is leaving. Julian Phillips as a likely one and done. Maybe if he isn't, that'd be, I guess, good for Tennessee. Maybe bad that he had a bad year. But, yeah, he's probably a one and done, but you're more than likely losing Vescovy and James, I think, for sure. And then again, Tyreek Key. So you're losing a lot from the backcourt. I would imagine top area of needs is getting more wings, whether that's combo guard, shooting guard, small forwards, whatever. I think getting wing players should be Tennessee's top priority. And they've already filled one kind of other area, and that was getting Cade Phillips, who is a post player. He's not a traditional post player, I don't think, but he's still 6 now. Like, that's a guy that you can count on, hopefully, to do something down in the lane or down in the paint for you. But I think for Tennessee, really, the wings need to be kind of your biggest areas of pursuit. And I think it's why you're seeing a guy like Justin Edwards, be as big of a target. He's a 6'7", 180. Like, that's a perfect like wing player in college basketball and the NBA for that matter too. But there's a reason he's a top 5 prospect too. He's just such a talented player. But I think to me it's wing, and then probably I don't know about point guard actually, because you would like to think that Ziegler and Edwards for the 23-24 season would be enough. Like, you'd like to think maybe a sophomore BJ Edwards and a junior Zakai Ziegler would be good enough for you at point guard. So maybe not point guard unless you get it Aiden Holloway. So I don't know. I'm curious if you have a differing opinion on that, because I think it should just definitely be getting those 6'4" to 6'7" type wing players as your next kind of big area of need for Tennessee.
Yeah, well, in this era of basketball, you can never have enough, elite shooters in the backcourt, like an Aiden Holloway. But like you said, I feel like the biggest need is wing position. And I think Tennessee's recruiting, the way they're approaching the 2023 recruiting trail is indicative of that. I mean, they're targeting a bunch of wings, and with, James leaving, and Vescovy's not a wing, but, with him leaving as well, and just that 2 spot, you can play big lineups as well. So I think they're attacking that position. Cade Phillips was a good start to that. Like you said, he's more of a post player, but, he could play the 3 as well. So with James leaving, I think that opens the door for them to attack the wing position. And really, that's why you want Jemai Mashak to have a great year. I'm afraid that he's going to have another down year and he's not going to get a lot of playing time. And then we could see him bounce next season, before next season occurs, obviously, and as he enters the transfer portal. But, we don't know that yet. He has a great relationship with multiple players on the Tennessee roster. You always see them around. Jemai's always in the group. So he has a strong connection with this program. But yeah, I think the wing position is the one to go after, like a Justin Edwards, like those guys we've mentioned. Cade Phillips, already a great start to this 2023 recruiting class. So I mean, there's going to be needs, but I think with the backcourt or the point guard position, I should single out here with BJ Edwards and Zakai Ziegler. Both are going to get so much better. They're going to develop that connection, and we could see them on the court at the same time, possibly next season. I think maybe if as long as BJ Edwards does what we think he's going to do, and really gets his feet under him in his freshman season, then maybe we could see a really good point guard combination next year. So wing position is the one to target. Jonas Aidoo is going to get better in the post. I think elsewhere they'll be pretty okay.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point about BJ Edwards, and I think he has a lot of potential for success. I mean, again, maybe not as much as a true freshman, because what Kennedy Chandler did as a true freshman isn't normal. Like that, people always think about high rated prospects coming in and being All-Americans and stuff. What Kennedy Chandler did, like Tennessee hasn't had very many freshmen do what he did last year. Even Keon Johnson and Jade Springer, as good a freshman seasons as they had, didn't have the type of freshman campaign that Kennedy Chandler did. So, what does Julian Phillips do this year? Because he's another guy that has the potential to be a really good player. But again, Gene and I talked about it a little bit last episode, I think, and maybe the episode before last, I forget which. Even if he just goes like 8-5, 8-4 this year, like his potential alone is going to make him an early first round type of prospect. So even if he doesn't have like the season on paper that maybe fans expect or hoping for, or whatever, he's, I think, still likely a one and done. So anyway, I want to go to the second half here for this episode and talk about Lady Vols, because Jack, again, you cover Lady Vol basketball as well, not just the men's side. So kind of a similar thing here for the Lady Vols. Looking at their roster construction, they are full. Like they don't have any scholarships left to give out, so they are done with additions for this upcoming season. And boy, what an offseason it's been for roster reconstruction for the team. They didn't really lose a ton. Lost Ray Burrell, and then you had Emily Saunders transfer off the team as well. So you had, obviously, to replace a pretty big contributor in Ray Burrell, who I wish she'd been healthy all last year to go out stronger than what she did. But she still, I think by the time the season was closing out, was starting to really kind of pick it up and be looking a little bit more like her older, her more vintage Ray. But goodness gracious, the transfer portal, the Lady Vols won the transfer portal. If it's, I always kind of hesitate to say winning the offseason, but Lady Vols, I mean, hopefully they won the offseason. Hopefully that means they win some big things in the regular season too. But you bring in Rakia Jackson, who, again, the headliner of the transfer portal players. You bring in a Jazz Powell, who is a true point guard, who Tennessee hasn't had a true point guard in a few years, which is great news, because I think she's going to be able to open up so much for them offensively. You bring in as potential depth pieces, and Jillian Hollingshed, who she'll be depth piece this year, but she'll more than likely be the starter of the next season after Tamari Key is gone. And then you also bring in a Jasmine Franklin, who played for Kelly Harper at Missouri State and is was leading the nation in rebounding last year before she suffered a season-ending injury. Oh yeah, and also you have Justine Passat, who is a 5-star McDonald's All-American, who would be getting a lot more attention if not for the fact that this roster, not only did you bring a lot of those players in, but you also were still returning players like Jordan Walker, who I think will move to the 2, but will be a very good, a very solid player again. Some of the younger players like a Brooklyn Miles, like a Kaya Wynn, a Sarah Puckett, who had moments last year, especially Puckett did as the season went along, and Caroline Striplin, who again started to show some flashes as the year went on as well. A Tess Darby, who was a very good 3-point shooter. And you bring back the 2 of your best players in the last 5 or 6 years in a Tamari Key, who's already your career block leader for the Lady Vols in history, passing the great Candace Parker. And who's the other person? Oh yeah, Jordan Horston, who just led your team before she got hurt in points, rebounds, and assists, and was I think second on the team, possibly in blocks as well. I think maybe leading the team in steals. I mean, she was a do-it-all player who, if she didn't get hurt, should have been would have been not just an All-American honorable mention like she was, but she would have been an All-American. I mean, Jack, this roster reconstruction, I guess if you can call it that, this offseason, it's been one of the biggest offseason hauls the Lady Vols have had in a very long time. And usually, back in the day, it would have just been all like bring in, 3 McDonald's All-Americans in an offseason through recruiting. This year, you brought in, you have 3 former McDonald's All-Americans. One of them is a recruit. The other ones are returning players and transfers. So it's just like you're loaded. And this is to me, the most talent the Lady Vols have had on the roster in a very long time. And I think with the coaching and with, the culture that Tennessee has now under Kelly Harper and her assistants, possibly the most healthy the program's been in a very long time too.
Yeah, definitely. They've to say they've attacked the transfer portal would be an understatement. I'm sure. Kelly Harper is just, her mouth has got to water when she looks at her roster for the upcoming season. But yeah, they filled every hole if there was one. I mean, of course, Ray Burrell left, but they filled that and then done more than that. So if you told me that after the offseason, looking at the Lady Vols roster, that there was no way that Sarah Puckett was going to start, I'd have told you were crazy. But I think that's the case, because I just do not see a spot for her in the starting lineup, which is wild to think after what she did in her freshman year. Not even a possibility of, like you said, Justine Passat coming in, 5-star freshman. She has done so well in summer ball as well. If y'all have been following her over there in Argentina, she's been killing it on every step of the way here in offseason ball. And, like you said, all these transfers, Rakia Jackson, of course, headlining that. She's probably going to start at the 4 for the Lady Vols to start this season, of course. And then Jasmine Franklin, all these other girls, Jillian Hollingshed, who, let's not forget, she had 15 points versus Dayton in the NCAA tournament for Georgia. She can hold her own. She's going to get valuable minutes off the bench. So they have so many players. It's just crazy. And the expectations, I think, like ESPN way too early top 25, they're in the top 5. I think you have to, bet that if you're looking at this Lady Vols roster and what they've been able to do with Kelly Harper. And I'll tell you why I have no inside information of why these transfers chose. I mean, you read and, you see the interviews, but you got to enter the transfer's mind here. And you see what the Lady Vols did last season with those injuries. They go to the Sweet 16 without Jordan Horston. They do all this without Kean Green at the end of the season. And that's just got to be so encouraging that they can rally around each other, give Caroline Striplin and Kaya Wynn really, really significant minutes in the SEC tournament and still do well. Give these young freshmen so many significant minutes and still hold their own. It's a testament to what Kelly Harper is building, on Rocky Top. And I think these transfers took notice, and, they're heading to Knoxville for a good reason. So with the amount of depth they have, the Lady Vols have, I think injuries, unless the bug just hits them like a rock, I think they'll be fine to fade a couple injuries this season. Whereas I don't think they really were last season to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. But yeah, I've only been following the Lady Vols for 1 year. I should say covering the Lady Vols for 1 year. But this is a special team, Nathaniel, and I think we should expect special things.
I think you're right. I think you're right about injuries too. That's been every time I've had Maria Cornelius on here, we both, I think every single time I've said fingers crossed and cross your toes and everything about health for this team, because every year Kelly Harper's been here, there's been some sort of major injury to the team, or at least like major injuries to players. And in a lot of cases, it's been your star players or really good players in the last 3 years. And hopefully that's just it's been freak accidents or fluke accidents. Most of them have. Hopefully it's not a thing that just keeps happening. Because like you said, that's the only thing, in my opinion, that could really derail this year. Because I do think that it's going to be. I think last time I had Maria on, I think that I titled the episode, "It's a good problem to have." It's a good problem to have to try to figure out the minute allocation for this team, because they're so talented and they're going to compete really intensely and fiercely at practice. I think too and that's no one's going to be given a starting spot or given minutes. You're going to have to earn all of them because of the talent on the roster. But it is definitely still a problem to have, and that how many minutes do you give this person, and how do you have to play somebody to maybe keep them a little happier than you would like? I don't know that that'll happen or not, because I think my point getting at this is that I think the culture at Tennessee is set in stone now with Kelly Harper and the players that she has right now, and just everyone who's there. Everyone who's there they're all Kelly Harper's players because she's coached them. But I think with the exception of the older players like Jordan Horston, they're all players that were recruited by Kelly Harper or retained by Kelly Harper when she got in as a recruit. So I think that this culture, I don't think is going to be one that is going to capsize, or that's going to have a bunch of selfish players that I'm not getting my minutes, I'm going to sit here and pout on the bench or whatever. I do think you'll see some transfers off the roster next season or after next season, but you're also going to see a lot of players going into the WNBA draft, because Rakia Jackson, Jordan Horston, and Tamari Key, all three I think are potential top 10 picks for next year, because they're all just really talented players. And of course, Jazz Powell, I think will be I think she uses up her eligibility. She might have another year left.
She does have another year left.
Yeah, she might use it. We'll see. But I think, would be eligible for the draft, so maybe she goes to the draft too. So, I think also, yeah, just Jordan Walker, she will be used up all her eligibility because she's using her last year. So you're losing some key players after this upcoming season. So there's a lot of feeling of like it's Final Four bust for this year because you don't know what's going to happen next year. We'll kind of get to maybe looking at some stuff for next year in terms of recruiting and kind of what that looks like. But I think you've already mentioned like the big expectations. I think it's great to have those expectations. I think this team warrants those expectations. But I want to caution people who are having that maybe the feeling of, oh, it's this year, or I won't say never, but it's this year, or we're going to wait another 3 or 4 years because this is going to be the best team we're going to see for the next few years. It probably will be the best team we'll see for the next 3 or 4 years, but I think I just don't want people to throw all of their hopes on this team, and then if for some reason they don't make the Final Four, go, oh, I'm out. Like, I'm out on Kelly Harper. I'm out. I don't think people will do that as much. But I don't think it should be, SEC title, which I don't think is the case. SEC title or bust, or Final Four or bust. And then, if that doesn't happen, then, oh, well, the future all of a sudden is trending down for Tennessee because the tournament is a fluke. We see teams all the time who look like they're built to make deep runs in the tournament, and especially the last few years in the women's game, get bounced early. It happens all the time in men's game. It's happened more and more as years have gone on with the women's game as there's been more parity into the sport. So I just think this team is built very, very deep and very talented. But again, the NCAA tournament's a crapshoot for a reason. You've seen more one seeds and stuff make it further and win titles in the women's game than you have the men's. But again, that's just because women's are just now building up the depth the men's tournament and the men's basketball's had for more years because women's sports are now getting the attention and getting more, money and getting more funding and stuff and getting more actual like care to it now too. So my whole point in all this, Jack, is to say that I don't think it should be a Final Four or bust type season, but I fully think this team will embrace those expectations, and I think the culture is strong enough to withstand, those expectations, and withstand any failure they may have in the regular season and bounce back. Because I just don't think we're going to see stories come out about, oh, this player was pouting and they kind of ruined the team chemistry or anything like that. I think these players and the culture that's with this program, I think is very strong. It might possibly be the strongest culture. I think both the basketball teams have maybe two of the strongest cultures on UT, and you get the run baseball in there too, because I think what Tony Vitello's done is pretty strong. But we're talking about basketball here. I think both Kelly Harper and Rick Barnes have very firmly established cultures within their programs.
Oh yeah, and you could definitely see it with Kelly Harper. I mean, Rick Barnes has his own very unique style way of coaching, but with Kelly Harper, just the way she rallies around her team. I mean, I can't remember what show it was on, but her halftime speech in the Arkansas game, that's just gonna get anybody ready to go out there and compete for their coach. Even the way she was talking, you just have to watch it to know. But yeah, it's that type of culture that's really worked and that's going to continue to work, I think, for the Lady Vols. And this is the roster to do it. We didn't even mention a couple of other players, but they're just so loaded. Marta Suarez coming back. Let's not forget she was an all SEC freshman forward. She unfortunately had to sit out all last season after getting injured in her freshman season. So she's entering a redshirt sophomore year. And then Brooklyn Miles, she was a great spark plug off the bench. She's an elite defender. The backcourt is just loaded with talent. So, and then, like I said, Sarah Puckett can't even start. So there's so much talent on this team, Nathaniel. And, you talk about Final Four or bust. I don't think you should ever talk about that way with anybody unless you're talking about South Carolina women's basketball, Alabama football. It's only those types of teams, and the Lady Vols just aren't on that level right now. They're not the best of the best and have been for multiple years. No, this is should be the best they have been for a while. Definitely this decade. But Final Four bust, that tag should never be placed on this team because, like you said, anything could happen in the NCAA tournament. I think if there is a tag you should place, you don't want to see those flops on the road like you saw last year against Auburn. And I know injuries played a part in those, but just getting really blown out by Florida and Alabama on the road, losing to Auburn, who was the worst team in the SEC at that time, you can't let those blunders happen. And then in the SEC tournament, you ran into Kentucky, who was just otherworldly hot. With Ron Howard and that team, they're shooting threes, left and right. So maybe you can avoid that in the SEC tournament, get to that championship game and play the likes of South Carolina, have that true test, because they only played South Carolina once last year, right? So, maybe you can see them make it a little farther in those and potentially make the Elite Eight, if not the Final Four, this year. So yeah, it's unfair to place those tags, but there is reasonable expectations to have for this team that do exceed the ones from last year.
Yeah, and you made a good point that I think maybe some longtime Lady Vol fans would have snarled at or like kind of gone, because I almost did too when you said it, but I thought you make a good point too that, it's not fair to put those expectations on the Lady Vols right now because you mentioned they're not like the South Carolinas or the Alabamas in football, for example, who have done it year in and year out. Lady Vols have historically been that, and historically, that is the 90s and early 2000s and mid 2000s. That is a fair expectation to put on the program because of what they were doing. But like you said, the last decade for Lady Vols hasn't been awful, but it hasn't been where the Lady Vols had been. They've dropped off. They haven't made it to the Final Four in 15 years or something like that. Like since their last national title, with Pat and Candace at the helm in 2008. I think double checked. I'm pretty sure that's right though, because last year was their first Sweet 16 in 5 years. So yeah, this program, I think you make a good point. It's as a historical program, you would think Final Four or bust. Yeah, it's fair because Tennessee has won all these titles. They've made all these Final Fours. You think, oh, that's fine. But then you have to look, you can't look at it from a 10,000 feet perspective. You have to look at it as a more microcosm of the last 10, 15 years. And Lady Vols haven't been that consistent of a program to getting to those highs of highs in the last 10, 15 years. So to all of a sudden expect this team to, surefire, make it that far isn't fair. And again, I think this team will embrace those expectations, and I'm not going to say anyone who thinks this team will make the Final Four is crazy. I just think that, like you said, it's hard to have Final Four bust mentality unless you are consistently a South Carolina or a UConn in the women's game, in the men's game, a Duke or North Carolina or Kentucky that consistently does those things. Lady Vols have historically done it, but they haven't lately, and that's been the issue. So if they can get there this year, that starts building back up to, okay, if they can do it this year, can they get back to the Elite Eight, my Final Four the next year? Can they do it again? So if you can do it this year, that hopefully will start the trend of, yes, we're getting back to where we should be type of program, because they historically are the greatest program in women's basketball. I mean, some will argue UConn. I still think it's Lady Vols. But lately, the last 10 years, UConn has Tennessee beat hands down. Last 10 years, teams like South Carolina, LSU possibly even have Tennessee beat. Lady Vols have not been what they used to be in the last 10, 15 years. They've still been good. They just haven't been elite, top echelon of the sport. So I think you made a good point that I originally kind of, my hairs kind of raised a little bit, but I was like, you makes a good point that,
thank you for bringing it back up and helping me out there. And of course, the Lady Vols have historically been, just great. But like you said, this will be if they do make the Final Four this season, it will be the first time in 15 years. They made the Sweet 16 last year for the first time in 6. It's a build, and everything's a build. Let's not forget, Kelly Harper hasn't been here for a long time, and her first 2 years were marred with COVID. Last year was her first, actually full year. Now it's her second, and she's bringing in a roster that, like you said, is one of the best Lady Vols roster we've seen in a very long time. So now is the time where you make your hay, but I still think it's unfair to put that Final Four bust tag on them. It's still a build, and I think it's a build that will continue to happen. I don't see any drop off happening anytime soon with the way Kelly Harper coaches, the way they're recruiting with Samantha Williams and Joy McCorver. They're elite recruiters, and I think Kelly Harper is an elite coach.
Well, Jack, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do want to, you mentioned they're kind of building and trying to sustain this success, and whatever success you have this year, it can't just be a one-off. And in order to do that, you're going to have to keep recruiting well. And again, probably attack the transfer portal again well next year. But on the recruiting front, Lady Vols, are in on some really big names. You and I were talking before we hit record here about, there's a couple of players that maybe keep an eye on, but there's several kind of 23 prospects that, Lady Vol fans, I'm sure probably already know about, but that, I wanted to ask you about because, whatever happens this year, you're going to definitely lose some big time contributors. And when Tamari Key and Jordan Horston and Rakia Jackson probably too, and probably again some other ones who transfer off or go to the WNBA as well. You're going to be losing a lot of production in order to not have a massive drop off. Kind of like what we saw the men's team after Grant Admiral and Jordan Bone and Cal Alexander all left. There was a pretty big drop off the next year because for one, you weren't expecting Bone to leave, but in order to prevent that from happening for the Lady Vols, they got to recruit strong in the 23 class. And again, there'll be transfer portal additions that'll happen too. But what are some names in the 23 cycle that, maybe that Lady Vol fans should keep an eye on, or that you're kind of front of mind for you right now?
Yeah, definitely. So there's two that I'm looking to, and both play are playing in Nashville right now. And it's Aaliyah Del Rosario and Angelica Velez. It's Velez is a point guard, 5'7", and then Del Rosario is 6'5" post player. So these two have shown interest in the Lady Vols. They visited with Tennessee. Visit went well from all the buzz I'm hearing about, but they're far from committed. But these are the two targets you're looking to. And they're both from New Heights, New York. So, they have the same sort of pipeline. And I think Tennessee's making a lot of hay with them. But like I said, they're playing in Nashville right now. So close to Knoxville. That's how Tennessee can capitalize right now. So I think those two are the ones you're looking to. It's still very early. And, Tennessee didn't per se bring in a lot of 2022 recruits from high school. It's really just Justine Passat and Edie Darby. So they're going to attack the transfer portal, and I think that's going to be the name of the game moving on in all of college athletics. But as far as high schoolers we're looking to right now for the Lady Vols 2023 class, those are two names that pop out.
Yeah, I think Del Rosario is my number one want for the Lady Vols in this class. There are other big time names that they're pursuing as well, but I think Del Rosario is just very talented. Again, 6'5". That when it's about having another big front court next year, you already have Tamari Key and Jillian Hollingshed this year. Next year, you could have, if you get Del Rosario, Hollingshed and Del Rosario, both 6'5" players. So keep that trend of having big forwards and centers in your rotation would be great. But again, Jack, I took up so much of your time tonight. I really appreciate you coming on here and doing the show with me as a guest. I kind of already plugged your Twitter earlier and plugged wherever you are, but if anyone who is listening to this, watch the show, wants to follow your work as, for Tennessee basketball, and I know you talk about football and stuff too, so if anyone wants to follow anything you do, let them know where they can follow you and kind of, maybe plug some of the stuff you have coming out or that you've had come out recently too.
Yeah, Jack Foster TV on all platforms. Really easy, really catchy. I love it. This season, I'll be covering UT football for Volunteer Country on Sports Illustrated, along with my boss, Matt Ray. And then, of course, both basketballs. I'm excited to hit the ground running. Second year on the beat. Couldn't be more excited. And then for the remainder of the summer, if you're interested in a little national stuff, got Always College Football with Greg McElroy that I do a lot of work with on Omaha Productions. Really appreciate you guys checking that out as well.
Yeah, check it out. Omaha Productions. Again, y'all know the name because of Peyton Manning. Exactly. Exactly. And Jack's going to be very busy when we get to SEC Media Days. So keep a lookout for that as well. And again, Jack, thank you so much. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate taking time to do this. And I know we're in the off season for basketball, but we're only kind of in the off season for football because there's not really a football off season anymore, I don't feel like. So I appreciate you taking time to do this. Signing off for Jack, I'm Nathaniel. I want to say thank you and appreciate all of you who watch along and listening wherever you're at home, at work, at working out, or on driving somewhere. Would really appreciate you guys listening and watching. Again, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, and like this video, and share it with any Vols or Lady Vols fans in your life. Signing off for Jack, I'm Nathaniel. This has been another episode of Vol Basketball Fever. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.